Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for this happy hour hosted by Women Banding Together, or WBT. I'm Jenny Allen. I'm one of the co-founders of WBT. I'm a Juilliard faculty member. I'm Artistic Director Emerita of the Philadelphia Wind Symphony, which I founded, and I'm also a retired Army Band Director. I'm joined by our co-founders today, and I'd like to introduce them. We have Jenny Neff, who's the Associate Professor of Music Education and Director of the MM and Summer Music Studies at University of the Arts in Philadelphia. She's also an active presenter and guest conductor. We also have Lori Schwartz REICHL, who's an author, educator, and consultant and founder of MakingKeyChanges.com. And Laura Johnson is the assistant conductor for the Bay Youth Wind Symphony and will be a band director in the Chesapeake School District this fall. We are so excited to welcome a member of the WBT community to be our guest today. Australian music educator Yvonne Brown will share information about her experiences with in-person instrumental music instruction during the pandemic. And Lori will talk more about her background in a few minutes. But Yvonne, if you just want to wave your hand so everybody can see you.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful to have you here.
I appreciate it.
Tell everybody a little bit about Women Banding Together, especially if this is your first time joining us. We organize this to support women band directors, and our mission is fourfold. We want to cultivate mentoring relationships for women band directors at all levels. We want to guide and connect directors who support women band directors, and we want to create a platform to explore issues of women band directors and provide advice and guidance for anyone who wants to mentor women band directors. So really it's a way to be able to support each other. Since our founding in May, we've hosted 3 panel discussions and a happy hour discussion. We have a Facebook page for Women Banding Together and an email list too. If you haven't yet liked our Facebook page, please look for it and do so. Because you're here today, you are now on our email list, but if you know of anyone else that you think we should add to that list, please let us know. And so now I'm going to hand it off to Jenny.
Thanks so much, and thanks everybody for joining us. I know we're really looking forward to having our guest Yvonne on today. In order to help facilitate today's happy hour, we'd like to request that you have yourself on mute unless you're asking a question or providing a comment in the discussion, and this will help eliminate any distractions or extraneous noise. We hope to end this by 5:30 at the latest, and so we want to keep the conversation moving, and we encourage you to use the chat for questions you might want to ask as we're going along. We're planning on discussing 3 specific areas, and within each, at the end of each area, having a little bit of time in between for you to ask questions. So Yvonne will be sharing information on protocols, social emotional well-being of her students, and the musical impact, and then we'll kind of pause in between each one and allow you to ask some questions. And so I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Hi everyone. Again, thank you so much for being here today. I'm just going to speak briefly on why we began hosting happy hours and our intent with this specific happy hour, since it's a little bit different than our last one. We started these discussions as a platform for our community to talk and network with one another rather than just having events in which the co-founders speak. This is just a chance for everyone to have a voice in a conversation. It's been a really great way to connect with one another, especially when we're in this time of physical distancing. During our last happy hour, Yvonne Brown offered some insight to her experiences planning for and implementing in-person instruction, and there was a lot of questions directed to her about that. So after that discussion, we felt that this next happy hour would be a fantastic opportunity to highlight Yvonne, who is currently teaching in person, and to help us address some of our anxieties or our concerns about teaching band during this pandemic. Whether you're slated to teach band virtually or teach in person this fall, we're hoping that we can discuss some considerations that we may need to keep in mind as we move forward with instrumental instruction. And now I will pass it on to Lori.
Great, thanks Laura. So we are excited to have an Australian music colleague with us today to share her recent teaching experiences. Women Banding Together acknowledges that there are differences in educational philosophies and practices between Australia and many other countries. With 6 states and 2 territories, the provision of music education in Australia varies state to state, with different models and programs offered in each jurisdiction. Australia refers to its schools as either primary or secondary, unlike in the United States where we usually refer to elementary, middle, and high school, but sometimes you'll hear Yvonne refer to secondary schools as high school. The Australian Society for Music Education, similar to our NAFME, or our National Association for Music Education, exists to encourage and advance music education at all levels as an integral part of general education and community life, and as a profession within the broad field of music. Women Banding Together acknowledges that Australia and the United States have handled the pandemic differently, and thus this has affected the way Australia is dealing with disease control and its response to educational scheduling. In our conversations today, we remind you to keep these differences in mind and to use the tools that work for you, your school, your students, and your specific teaching situation, but most importantly, for your safety and your sanity. Our guest today, Yvonne Brown, has almost 30 years of experience as both a conductor and tutor in ensemble programs at both primary and secondary schools across Sydney, Australia. She studied trumpet at both the Sydney Conservatorium of Music and the University of Sydney. She has had the privilege of working with students as a conductor in wind ensembles, string ensembles, jazz ensembles, and choirs, both in Australia and on tours overseas. We welcome Yvonne to our Women Banding Together community and look forward to learning from her. I'm going to pass the baton to Laura to ask our first question of Yvonne.
Wonderful. So our first topic is about protocols, but I think before we even dive in, Yvonne, we'd love if you could give us a general sense of your current teaching position, things like how many students you teach, your class schedule, the type of school you're in, those types of things.
Okay. Thank you, first of all, for giving me the privilege of sharing what we're going through, because it is very different, but there are also some common things just for considering. I work across a number of schools. I'm a peripatetic conductor and tutor, so I work roughly in 10 schools across Sydney. I will go in and conduct, for example, what's today? Thursday, our time. So I have 3 hours of tutoring somewhere, then I head to a completely different place for a couple of hours of rehearsal, then some more tutoring. And that's very much how my schedule goes each day. I have 60 students and currently 7 bands across primary schools and high schools, so from your beginners up to your end of school, which is great. I love the variety, and the fact that I'm in and out of so many schools has proven a huge advantage as we negotiate this current time, because each school is approaching things differently, and each of my colleagues at those schools are thinking through things differently. So again, I feel really privileged with that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I didn't realize you were in so many different places. That's really fantastic.
Oh, I love it. It's how I thrive. I don't do well in one school all day. I just need the stimulation of different environments and the different kids, because it adds so much to what I do.
Absolutely. So in terms of protocols, I think we can start maybe really generally, and then we can move into music things. So we understand, you know, teaching during this pandemic isn't going to be one size fits all. Like we've talked about, we're going to need to do what's necessary for each school and each community. And some of us are doing virtual, some are planning to do in person. So for those in-person people, what are your schools doing in terms of like people coming into buildings or physical distancing, sanitation, those types of general things?
Okay, I'm in Sydney, which every state has a different education system, and the way music is taught and the things are structured is different as well. I was actually in England. I got back to Australia just as parents were starting to pull students out of schools, and I decided, well, I was in self-isolation, so I couldn't teach anyway. So I just waited to see what happened. At that point, everyone went basically onto online learning. So I was teaching my individual students that way and noticing how, how overwhelmed they were because of all of the uncertainty. My ensembles I stayed in touch with, but I chose to just wait and just see how students would be. Beginning of last term, which for us is the end of April, schools started to take students back. We had, I've written some notes, I'm trying to read them, it's a bit early. Each year group returned for 1 day a week. Now that was done differently across schools. You had some going alphabetically, some going with, say, 10 students from each class 1 day, 10 another day. A couple of weeks later, you had students returning 3 days. And for those of us who were instrumental teachers, we weren't involved in the going back at that point. We were all still trying to rework our schedules each week on Zoom. Then towards mid to late May, students went back 5 days a week. They didn't have sport, rehearsals, assemblies, and there were a whole lot of school protocols in place. So, for example, they staggered drop-off and arrival times and areas, usually within, most schools, I think a 15-minute time frame, but you might have 1 year exiting one gate, another gate. They staggered recess and lunch times. Within the classrooms, you had no sharing of resources, so no pencils, pens, books. Desks in some classes were rearranged, so they were all facing forward. They weren't in little groups. You had none of, particularly with the younger kids, they weren't sitting on floors for things. They were all at their desks. If I was talking to a colleague of mine who's a primary teacher in Melbourne, and she said, rather than kids, for example, picking up a book and going, oh no, I don't like that one. No, you have to have that for the whole day, and then she would clean it at the end of the day. You have increased school cleaning, which has, rather than beginning and end of the day, there's a clean during the day. Everywhere you look, there's hand sanitizer and wipes. And basically, if you touch something, you wipe it and you sanitize. General school things, again, no parents, no external providers were allowed on site. Gates that were normally open and community members would actually walk through, everything was closed. Some schools you had, because of the division of recess and lunch times, you had different year groups that just didn't interact with other groups. At the end of the day, when they were going home for buses, you had one group gathering somewhere, another group gathering somewhere else. It was a case of being very, very cautious, and I think seeing what happened. Staff, basically, if you are even remotely unwell, you stay home. You don't go anywhere near the site. Limiting staff, the number of staff in staff rooms, because the concern here is very much the adult transmission. The research that was done here is that the student transmission is not actually going to be much of a problem. And we don't have the high community transmission rate that is seen in other countries, and that's really affected lots of what we do. Things like staff meetings were online as well. So basically it was a case of separate adults and just take things slowly with kids, be overly cautious and that was in some ways, in my view, to keep parents calm. Because if they were calm, the kids were going to be calm and we were going to be able to do things. So they're the kind of general protocols that were in place.
Thank you. There's so much to consider. I feel like we're all
absolutely exhausted. We're in day, what day is it? Thursday. We're in day 4 of week 2, and we're all exhausted because you can plan something and 5 minutes later, everything's changed. The other thing to note is that if there is a case in a school, it's closed straight away. Students are sent home. School is deep cleaned, and the close contacts are asked to self-isolate for 14 days. The other students will come back in a day, 2 days, whenever it's deemed appropriate. So you've got the uncertainty of what will happen each day, and you have schools doing COVID evacuation drills. Just this group goes this way, this group goes this way. This is just so the kids are comfortable if it happens, and there's no panic, and we know where everyone is. And that's just the general school stuff without even getting into ensembles.
I'm like processing all of this information. Yeah. There are things there that I didn't even think of for myself and going back to school.
I am going to do a summary. I thought I'd wait until after today so I could make it appropriate. But there's just so much to consider. It's not just one thing. And the part of it is there's so much unknown about this disease. So you need to be able to adapt and be very flexible in how you do everything, because nothing is the same, and one thing changes the next thing.
Absolutely. Well, and you mentioned, these are, as we said, very general things. What about some more musical protocols, things with instruments or your rehearsals themselves?
Schools, again, have taken a very, very different approach. And part of it depends on where they are, what their school community is like, the size of their school. So I have little schools, some of them are 300. My biggest high school is 1,200. So the biggest schools, actually, it's not true. The biggest schools haven't necessarily been more cautious, but it's been a very different going back approach. In terms of individual lessons, each time each time I go into my schools, I have an external visitor. I've got one here somewhere, an external visitor form that looks something like that. There's a whole page of protocols and an acknowledgement of where you haven't been. On one of them, I even need to say where I've been before I arrived at school, and acknowledging you've read all the guidelines, and that you're aware of just the protocols for that specific school. And that's something that every time you go into a school, you have to sign. So I sign 14, 15, 16 of those a week. Individual lessons, and we're having sanitizer and wipes provided. They've looked at where we're all teaching to. I know I've moved from a room with no windows. I had a lovely beach scene painted on the wall. I now have a window because ventilation is important. No one understood why I love that room. Now they do. So it's windows open. If there's a hard surface, you wipe it. You wipe it before the student comes in, and you wipe it again when the student goes, including chairs and music stands. So it's a matter of even getting the timing on when you wipe things right, because when they sit on the chair, they're going to get wet, or their music's going to get wet. Just little simple things. No instruments are shared. So your bigger instruments like tubas, baritone saxes, instead of one at school, one at home, it's lug. You've got to take it home. You've got to bring it back. Students having their own copies of music rather than having band folders that are kept at school. You have a protocol the department's put in place of, if you're conducting or teaching an ensemble, you have to be 3 meters away from anyone in front of them. Distancing of musicians. And again, different schools are approaching this differently, because you've got to consider there's a mixture of 3 things. There's the social distancing, there's droplets, and there's aerosols. So you've actually got to come up with something that's a combination of all 3 for where you're in. I'm just looking through my notes. Good hygiene. You sanitize as you come in. You get the students to sanitize. You're making sure students are cleaning their instruments properly. So lots of these things are around the lesson rather than the lesson itself. Brass condensation, I dare not call it spit, because people have crises when you call it spit. Some schools are using paper plates, other schools are using puppy training pads, other schools are getting students to bring in cloths, goes home in a resealable plastic bag. The biggest thing is getting the students to remember any of the above. And getting used to the new norm. Microphones, you're still able to use a microphone. but it needs to be a good 15 centimetres away. And it's a case of not interacting with other staff in the way you normally would. So yes, you still have the little chats outside the room, but everyone is in, work and out. In the lessons themselves, I have, for the most part, reasonably big rooms. So just, I don't even know what the word is. I say to students, you have this half, I have this half. I'm not going to touch your music or anything like that. And I had one student with a stuck valve on his trumpet last week, and what I could have done in 10 seconds was I had to send him home to get his father to do and talk him through it, because you can't do simple things like that anymore. So I guess that's the sort of things that are in lessons. I know I'm a little bit random with it all, but there's just so much. And it's as you go through that you think, oh, hang on a minute, someone hasn't thought of that. If a student walks into a lesson and you ask how they were, and if a student says, well, actually, I've got a sore throat or something like that, it's right. Okay, I can't actually teach you. This is a school protocol. I need to take you to wherever the appropriate office is at the time, and you'll need to go home. And it's little things like that in ensembles as well. It's please don't send children if they're sick. I'm allowing extra time for to set up, pack up in rehearsals, because you can't have a system where, okay, this group does this group does that. No, you have to put this away, you have to put this away. And you've got protocols in place for pianos because keys need to be wiped. You've got protocols in place for percussion because percussionists need to remember their own sticks, but things need to be wiped. And it's explaining to the kids what and why and how, because they'll instinctively go and do what they normally do. So again, there's all of those kind of things.
I love what you said about like you're finding things out as you go. When you said the trumpet valve moment, that's something I would not have thought of at all until it probably would have happened right in front of me.
I had a tenor sax player in a rehearsal the other day with a stuck gooseneck. And have you ever tried to explain to a beginner how to, just that one. You've got, the key is actually retaining a sense of humour and making the whole wiping and sanitising thing fun, particularly for the younger kids. And I know one of my primary bands, we have an absolute ball with the sanitising and the wipe. They've turned it into a little game. And that to me says it all. This is not an easy time for us, but I think it's much harder on the kids. And keeping them sane will keep you sane.
I think that's a fantastic point. Jenny, would you want to maybe help go through the chat here? We can take some questions just on protocols.
Sure, maybe for about 5 minutes we could address some of the ones in the chat. So Jenny Lipford was asking, are there any changes, I guess, other than you're moving from your mural room to your window room, any changes to the ventilation system or time between classes for rooms to sit empty?
We are asked to keep windows open, which we do. I tend to open them as much as I can. We're fortunate in the climate here, and I know that could pose a problem in the cold climates in winter. The time between students, we don't necessarily have to put time between students. At some schools I do, because I found that particularly the schools I teach low brass at, I need to give the kids time to come in and out of the room anyway. So I've put 10 minutes in place there, and I actually like having that gap. So I'm going to keep going even with that, even when I don't need to. Other schools actually need to go and fetch the students from the classrooms. That gives the gap. As you go, doors open, windows are open, and you do as much as you can.
Great, thanks for that info. And then Carol was asking, first of all, she said, thank you so much for speaking today. are your communities generally very supportive of all the new changes? And have you found that our current challenges have affected the number of ensemble participants you have?
That's something that I'll address in the next one.
Okay, okay.
Parents have been amazingly supportive online. And one of the things I actually loved about doing Zoom lessons is I got to meet my parents.
Mm-hmm.
I don't usually get to meet them. They don't get to meet me, and all of that's been beneficial. Schools have been supportive too. They've seen how important music is to the culture of their school. There's a lot of really good things like that have come out of it. And I think at one point there was a sentence I put in one of the emails that I sent. Said the key to returning well is centred on consolidating and further developing the relationships we've already established with schools, colleagues, and students and their families. And the trust within all of those relationships. I've had we've all had students that we've needed to send home, and just checking up with parents, how are they going? And having the parents say, look, we really, really appreciate you doing that, and checking up. And it's been positive. You can also tell at which schools are more stressed than others. So you adjust where you do and don't go. And I tend to do a lot of emailing to those schools, and asking questions well before I get there.
Okay. Heather was wondering if you can wear gloves to fix the instruments or anything like that. Are you not really allowed to do that?
I think at this point, it's best not to, just to try and explain. The protocols are adjusted all the time. My biggest band, I was told initially I wouldn't see until September, and I saw them in June. So as things get adjusted, we may be able to go back to sorting instruments. The other thing, though, is instrument repairers are quarantining instruments. So when you take an instrument to be repaired, some people are just setting it aside for 14 days, some people for 7 days before they'll actually look at it. And that's impacted how you think of things again. So that's complicated little problems. So I find I'm planning ahead with getting instruments serviced.
Right, that makes sense.
Again, something you don't normally think of.
Jenny Lipford also wanted to know, are you still allowed to use paper, or are you having to cover music in plastic?
This is where you're getting students to make sure they have their own music, which is a challenge, but it's great for reinforcing the idea. If I show up to a gig and I don't have my gear, I've got a problem. So it's using it to teach the personal responsibility with the instrument, with the music. We're allowed to use paper, but I mostly am getting students, I'm scanning, sending, they're downloading, and hopefully remembering to bring.
I know that eyeball roll.
It's like trumpets and valve oil. No, you can't actually borrow mine or his. You have to use yours.
Yeah. So maybe one more question before we move on to the next segment. Have you seen any, and I guess we're all kind of sitting, walking on eggshells here, wondering what's going to happen. And we've had to step up advocacy efforts a lot as far as schools maybe using budgets, substituting budget issues with, corona pandemic issues. But have you seen any music programs suffering from any cuts because of the pandemic?
Not in terms of money that I know of.
What about in terms of existence? Like, have they said we just won't have music right now because it's too scary?
Particularly with the auditioned ensembles for high school kids, you find that they're not rehearsing because they have students from multiple schools. So, and initially you didn't have inter-school sport at all. So I actually got to take a band rehearsal somewhere during sport time, which is unheard of in Australia. but you don't have that mix. So where you would have the extension things for kids outside school, some of them aren't there anymore. They will come back, but not quite at this point.
Great. Those are really helpful questions and answers. So thank you, everybody. I think we're going to move on to the second area, which is the kind of topic of social and emotional well-being. We know that music is an area that naturally aligns and addresses our students' social and emotional well-being. And at the same time, we realize that going back to school after time at home during this pandemic can create some anxiety or unknowns for our students. So how did you address the social and emotional well-being in your classroom since you've been back at school?
Okay, I adopted the approach with my individual students. I actually saw them online, and I made a point of being as normal as possible, but also giving them room. How are you going? How's the homeschool going? And just making what we did here a safe place for them. And they would start to interact, and some of them would just need to talk for 5 minutes before we did anything. And I try and build relationships with my students anyway. In terms of bands, again, I stayed in touch by saying, guys, this is what I'm planning for when we go back. And I'll talk a bit about that later. And just checking in that way. So they knew I was there and that I was still thinking about. When rehearsals got back, I've tried to be consistent. I've tried to be exactly the same person I always am, but also allowing times, especially in the first rehearsal, guys, have you got any questions you want to ask? Do you understand why we're doing this? Preparing for the rehearsals by sending home an email to parents saying, these are the protocols that the department's put in place that we'll be following. Here's this latest article on instruments, or here's this. If you've got any questions, we're here. We want to talk. We're happy to talk. Ask as we go. Some bands, I had everyone back straight away. Other bands, their kids have come back gradually as parents have felt more comfortable. And for me, it's as much about parents being comfortable as students being comfortable. The enthusiasm of students as they've come back, they actually missed band, which was brilliant. I think the night, on a Thursday, it was announced that bands would resume on a particular date, and I checked my Google Classroom, and here's one of my kids going, so we're back tomorrow morning? And I said, I think it's going to take us a week to get the email home, just a little bit of patience. But actually that was the same school. I showed up to the first rehearsal back and there was no one around. All these people coming through car parks, they're everywhere. There was no one. I saw 3 stunning clarinets. I thought, great, I've got the clarinets. They're the reliable ones. I walked in. There was no one outside because they were already there, excitedly waiting. And it's harnessing that enthusiasm. Right, guys, off we go. Here's the new norm, but let's do it and let's help each other. We are really fortunate to be back. It's highlighting that. And I'll often talk to them about my colleagues around the world anyway. And I say, this person isn't going to see their band till April 2021. We are really, really fortunate. And acknowledging what we're going through, but also looking at the future. What can we do? It's a great opportunity, I found, within rehearsals to focus on concepts. What they were struggling with was really, really obvious. Their concentration spans aren't very long, but their enthusiasm is there. So it's given me an opportunity to just rejig repertoire and concentrate on particular concepts, because I know we can move ahead, and staying focused on that, not going, oh, well, everyone's going through something. I really just need to not add to that. This is actually the time to give them stuff to do, because it takes their mind off everything else. Mm-hmm. I'm also keeping an eye on the kids that are in front of me, and you can tell if something's not quite right. It's a matter of just sort of, as they're packing up, how you going? You going okay? And they'll often go, yeah, and just talking to parents behind the scenes, saying, how are they travelling? I left it purposely for about 4 or 5 weeks, as to let students come back. Now I know I've got a list of kids I haven't seen in bands, so I can then contact parents and say, is there something I can do to make you more comfortable with this? Or is there something about that the child's uncomfortable with, or did they just not cope with online learning? Because that's the other thing to consider. Some kids didn't. They really did not cope. Acknowledging that part of it as well. There's all these little components in rehearsals that you're keeping an eye on. The kids were just thrilled to get back to school and see their friends, because they didn't have sport, they didn't have anything. But to get back to school and see their friends, they came to life. And I noticed a difference within the first week. When I was even still teaching them online, you could see, oh, great, there's a little bit of normality and I've got my friends.
That's great.
So just little things like that. But you could also notice a difference between the kids that had practiced and not practiced. I had some kids asking for 2 lessons a week while we were on Zoom. And they flew along. And they were much more focused at home because they didn't have the distraction of their friends or the forgotten music or the forgotten instrument.
Great. Wow. That's great. I think as you're talking, it just, it hits the point home of how our building relationships with our students is so crucial. We've known that for a long time, but especially now. And, for them to see, to know you, who you are as a person, whether that be for a short or lengthy time, and to see that, okay, the teacher's like calm, so I'm okay. Kind of like when I look at a flight attendant, when we get turbulence, like, are they okay? Because I'm okay, right? As soon as they get a little frazzled, then we got something else going on. But, they're looking at you for that calm, and then you're kind of looking at them too for that energy, and it's that feeding off of each other, and then the social part of it. I think it's
the thing that I've loved too is I've actually raised the standard of what I was planning on doing at this point of the year with some of the kids because of the way they've come back, what they've done while they're away, and just they want things so badly. It's like, right, guys, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this piece. We're going to have to work at it, but we'll get it. It gives me a chance to teach you about this, 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 and this. Are you in? Yes. It is harnessing that energy, but it is also that calm and making sure that even if you are concerned about something, they don't know it. I used, with my biggest band, I used the distancing as a way of looking at acoustics. What happens if we put big gaps between chairs? And this is the bright kids in that band. What happens if we put that gap in there? How does that affect our sound? What happens if I move the flutes from here and I put the flutes there, and I put you here and I put you here? It's using everything as a teaching tool. Again, that takes their mind off of what could happen if this happens or if this happens.
That's great. So I guess we'll open it up now for maybe 5 minutes or so for questions along these social emotional learning. And Carol has a question, and she was saying she's sorry, maybe this was already covered, which I don't think it was, Carol, so you're good, about if you're using any sort of bell covers or clarinet bags or all these things we've seen coming out. And I don't know if you want to talk about that now, because we're kind of talking about social emotional, or if you want to, I know you're also going to go into how it's changed musical things in your classroom. And Laura, if you want to help with the questions, that's great.
I think no is the answer to bell covers and clarinet bags. The big difference between where I am and America is the level of community transmission. So I think the way we approach it can be slightly different. The biggest change is really trying to get the brass to collect their condensation rather than leaving a pool of spit on the floor. Excuse me for saying it quite like that. But that's the biggest challenge. The other things, I think as more research is done, if we need to adjust, you adjust. And again, that's the big thing. For us, we're back. And that was the big thing. We're back, so we're being cautious to the extreme. If we need to, we will. But it'll be interesting to see how all this research comes through and how it changes what we do long term. But at the moment, no, that's not something we're considering that I've heard of, but that could change in, an hour when I get to school.
We have another question in the chat, and it says, how do you keep the kids that are staying home engaged in real-time rehearsals or engaged with the group?
We the government did this very well, in that they said students must come back to school. Homeschooling will end, even if you are in if you have a vulnerable member of your family, and there's a whole lot of things associated with that. So everyone is back at school unless they're sick. For me, it was using the time that we weren't rehearsing to set up online things, just simple things like Google Classrooms. And I've over the last couple of years, I've caught up with a whole lot of people that I knew when I was doing like audition ensembles around Sydney when I was studying. Excuse me for a minute while I deal with the cat. Please don't scratch the floor. Gimme. Sorry about that.
We've all been there.
I really just don't want the carpet destroyed today. Maybe tomorrow. That's called to not pay me enough attention. Now where was I? Oh yeah. So I've got all of my old mates who are going to do tutorials for me, and this was going to happen while we were off, but we went back so quickly that it's turned into a long-term thing. So I've been saying, okay, guys, here's the person doing your trombone tutorials. Here's where he is. Here's a little bit of his background. Here's him doing some playing. So it's making sure I put up a different person. I've organised someone, because all the festivals are cancelled. A colleague in Manchester is going to appraise all my bands. So I put up some things that of him conducting different ensembles where he is, so they get to know him. Some practice. Cheatham's in Manchester did a series of daily practice demos. And they're about 3 or 4 minutes long, absolutely perfect for the kids. Guys, start to think about how you're practicing. Yes, I'm assuming you're practicing. Please don't tell me if you're not, but start to look through this and think about what you're doing. There's all these little things like that you've got the opportunity to do. And it's actually the perfect time to do it. I think that answered the question. I forgot what the question was when the cat.
I think that's great advice, yeah. It doesn't seem like we have any other questions right now, but people can always add in as we go. So maybe we'll move on to our final topic and we can get some of those other questions at the end. So for our last topic, we're talking, about how COVID-19 has affected us in a lot of different ways, but in your emails with us, something that struck me was when you were talking about the impact of COVID-19 on music itself and on what you do in the music classroom. So we'd love to hear your experiences on the impacts you've seen with repertoire, with students' ensemble ears. I love that quote that you had there. Practice habits, performances, and anything else music related that you'd like to share.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the festivals, as I mentioned, because you can't have a group of people anywhere. So festivals have cancelled. There's no performances. So what the kids need something to aim for when they get back. They need a reason to rehearse. So as I said, I've organised a colleague in Manchester to appraise my bands. So I started talking about that before we went back, guys. We actually have something to aim for. Here's the date we're doing it on. Here's the repertoire. Let's get into it. I'm putting on, here's your practice plan. Here's what I'm going to cover next rehearsal. And then starting to think of other ideas. Often our high school bands do country tours. We obviously can't because you're not allowed to do overnight excursions, but why can't we do something like this with little country schools? My favourite school ever to go on a band tour is a little school in country New South Wales that was affected by fires last year. I was there a few years ago. There were 30 kids in the school. I had more kids in my band. We had an amazing time. The relationships that are built that way. Let's start to find these little schools that most people on tours don't visit. Let's go there. Because our end of year will be, lovely hot summer, let's look at some outdoor concerts. So one of my biggest high school, we're actually planning a Sunday afternoon where we have, we stagger it. So we have a barbecue in there as well. It becomes, we can do all of the things we need to do. They've got something to aim for. So that's performance-wise. Otherwise, why are they here? Why are they getting up at, you know, a ridiculous hour of the morning to get to school at 7:15? Introducing different things like the online resources. And they will be things I do long term. For me, it gives them a chance to meet Aussies that I know who are working around the world and doing amazing things. But because they left before the internet, no one here knows. And they just want to feed back in. And the thing I found actually is that no one anywhere, Australian or not, that I've said, would you like to do this, has said no. Everyone's gone, yeah, I can do that. And I know that's what other colleagues around the world have found too. So it gives us this great chance to work together and to get involved in parts of the world where we're not normally, because what I love about going to things in America and England is I get to see completely different ways of approaching things, and I can add them. They enhance what I do. What did I notice in my rehearsals ensemble is kids haven't been sitting in the middle of bands. They haven't been in the middle of the playground where you can hear your friends, even though there are 500 people yelling around you. That was really interesting for me. I wasn't thinking about that in my first rehearsal, but I could hear it as soon as they played a note. I thought, oh, right. So it's going back and teaching them how to listen, reinforcing things about balance, reinforcing things about blending. Again, as I said earlier, the concept, targeting little specifics. You know what's cemented. We only had maybe a month of rehearsals before we went off at the beginning of the year. You know what's cemented, and you know what you still need to do. So little targeted concepts work brilliantly. In terms of retention of students, what it's done is, I think for people generally, it's shown them what's important in their life. And I hear of colleagues saying, you know, parents say we can't push them anymore, which perhaps suggests that maybe it wasn't what the child was in, but they wanted to be doing anyway. So it's kind of, yes, it's changed numbers, but in some ways it's changed numbers simply because the kids that maybe weren't as passionate about it aren't there. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or the kids with behaviour that were causing behavioural problems aren't there, there's been that effect. It will have an effect, you know, for a few years. One of the things that I hear from my colleagues is, oh, I've got to lower my standards. Oh, I've got to do this. It's like, no. We've got all this energy. We can target the things we need to work on. Yeah, we can actually, we don't need to take that approach. Let's give them challenges. Let's do that. Let's make this as normal as we can and adjust. The other thing, sorry, going back to doing things with little country schools or things like that, why don't we do more creative arts things generally? Like, let's, instead of doing a band tour, let's get the choir going. Let's get this going. Let's get visiting educators to come visit us. I've just got to work out the protocols here, and I'll have one of my mates in the US come and work with my brass one morning. So that too, the kids that are going, oh, should I be going back? All of that stuff encourages them to come back. But in terms of musical development, it's their ears. It's their ears that are the big difference. Yeah, I'm just, there's not a lot else that I noticed musically. The kids that have practiced have obviously moved on, and I've actually had to go to one school and say, here's what your brass have done. This person can now do this. We've sorted this out. Can I politely suggest you do this arrangement of this song? And they've gone, great, yep, fine. So there's here's what we've noticed is missing. Here's what we've noticed has grown. Let's adjust and let's move from there. If you ask me about specifics, I'm happy to answer specifics, but that's the first thing that came to me.
Yeah, fantastic. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if people have any about like musical impacts, or even we can open it up to questions from before or things that we've been thinking of, we can do that as well.
One of the other things that we've done, and I know because our programs are very much because they're external, parents pay. So being aware of the fact that parents, have lost income and adjusting our fees for the ensemble programs. But again, this is where I found the schools supportive, because the schools have dropped in, and one school said, look, we're lowering the parent fees this amount, we're gonna put that in so that you get paid and you get taken care of. And that's where I've been really fortunate.
Yeah, so if we want to open it up for questions from anyone else, let's see what else we have in the chat.
I can start with one of my own if we need one. Oh, maybe there's one. Deborah, did you have a question?
Sure. Thank you, Yvonne, for doing this for us today.
Pleasure.
I was curious, we're on the East Coast, and it seems like there is an atmosphere of absolute terror to go back to school. And we have all these plans in place. Was there any sort of way that you were able to console, whether it's parents or students?
Sorry, I forgot the part about we were all terrified.
Yes. Just, if you have any thoughts.
Look, yeah, and that's something that, we were all excited that we got to go back. And then you start reading through the protocols, and then at that point you start to think, okay, what am I walking into? We don't know much about transmission. We don't know much about this disease. And I actually had to deal with my own apprehension before I went back, but it was a matter of evaluating the facts. And for me too, it was the fact that I trusted the leadership of the schools involved. And I knew they were making good decisions, and I knew they would adjust as they go. I mean, one of the things I'm doing at the moment is I'm making sure I've got everything I need scanned, everything I need done at schools done, in case something in Sydney goes the way Melbourne has gone and everyone's back in lockdown. There's that uncertainty too. But I completely understand the being terrified, the being apprehensive. I think one of the things schools did was give tutors the option of going back or staying on Zoom. And I think there are still some tutors who are on Zoom. Everyone is going to approach it differently, and everyone is going to feel more or less comfortable. And that for me is one of those things that you need to be comfortable yourself before you go back into the environment, because that's what the kids are going to pick up. But it's also not good for your own psychological state, because you can't do your job effectively if you're terrified. But yeah.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I hope that helped. It's a crazy time. It's just a nutty time. And I actually said to a band this afternoon, now think ahead 30 years. How are you going to explain the year 2020?
I have a question.
Bernadette, yeah.
I have a quick one, Yvonne. I have a family on both sides, husband and mine, all teachers. We're the only two who aren't right now. We have been. Have you run into what they're predicting when you have the first student who is tested positive or goes home positive? What have you gone through that, and what are you doing?
No, we've got structures in place. I don't teach at home. I've always made a point of not teaching home, because for me that's simply the difference between work and not work. Lots of my colleagues do, but there are procedures in place at schools. If a student has a sore throat, hey, don't come to school. But if they happen to, they go to student reception, they go home, they have to get tested, they're not come back until they're okay. We have schools, there's a school closed today. In fact, my old high school is closed today because a student's parents tested positive. So the child can be tested. So there's all these procedures in place to get ahead.
That's fabulous.
I've got another family that went away to a hotspot that wasn't a hotspot when they went away, but they've come back. Everyone who's been there has been advised to be tested, And they actually contacted me and said, look, this is the situation. Can we do a Zoom lesson? Yep. And I got another text yesterday. We're still not through our 14 days. We just want to be careful for you. Can we organise something later in the week, or can we do this? People are looking out for each other. Kindness is one of the things that I've rarely seen as much of as I am right now.
That's wonderful. I think a few of us are all in shock listening to the amount of plans and the detail and the focus. Girls, I live in Tennessee, and my grandkids are in Oklahoma, and we're all kind of like, they just come back, no mask, no social distancing. There aren't a lot of plans, and the teachers I know are starting to go a little crazy, and rightfully so. So it's wonderful to hear.
But our plans weren't necessarily in place when we went back. It's the department has issued guidelines. So, you know, I have got guidelines for infection control for creative arts, practical guide for classroom teachers. And they're simple 2-page guidelines, but here's what you'd like, here's what we want you to follow. And I think, again, one of the simple things is they've kept the guidelines short, succinct. Therefore, everyone will read them and not glaze over and go, I just don't understand. It's been a very simple message, and the simpler we keep the message, the easier for everyone.
Do parents get
and the simpler the steps.
Yvonne, do parents get a copy of those guidelines too, or is there a place that they can see them?
Oh yeah, parent. There's a lot of communication between schools, parents. I'm not a parent myself, but the parents are on top of things because they want to know. They want to know their child's going to be okay. And that's, like I said, when I got back from England, I was supposed to be over there for 2 weeks. I was over there for 3 days. But I got back, and that's when parents were starting to pull kids out of school because they weren't sure. So the guidelines are available. I will find out something at one school that they're doing, and I'll quickly, as soon as I get to another school, this is what this school's doing here. This is how they're handling that. Oh, that's a great idea. We can do this. And I said to one school, do you mind if I share the guidelines? Take the guidelines, share the guidelines. We're all working together so that what we all do works, because none of us want to go backward. We've got a lot of things starting to open up, but because of a little bit of community transition, the government's gone back a couple of steps with, say, restaurants and things, but everyone actually wants to do the right thing, that I'm finding. But simplicity in what the guidelines are is a key.
Any other questions from anybody or discussion?
Got to do that 10-second teacher wait.
Yeah, I was
you
just
never
gonna
know.
say,
Somebody might join in.
And someone will say, no, I don't have a question. And then they'll suddenly have a question, and you go, you just...
Yeah, I've noticed teaching this summer, the 10-second wait rule is much longer online. Everybody's like singing your praises, Yvonne, saying thank you. This is great information.
And look, as I said to you guys as we were emailing, I just wanted to plant some seeds this morning, because it is overwhelming. When I got back from England, I sat here for 2 days going, what am I going to do? How do I do this? Everything's uncertain. Take the time that you need to work out what you need to do. And if I've given you some guidelines, that's great.
Someone else, so Jenny was saying, I have a kid issue right now, but wonder what you would do if schools open, but they couldn't play instruments. That's my current dilemma. What do I do with them in person without instruments to prepare them to play alone at home? And I think we're seeing a lot of this. I know around Philadelphia, we're seeing a lot of that. I used to work in the most litigious school district in the state, and so they definitely said there will be no singing and no playing of instruments until it is safe or deemed safe by whoever's going to do that. So I think, you probably have some suggestions. I know one of our things has been to talk about how we do perform, but that's not all we do. That we, if we look at artistic processes for our standards, we have responding, we have creating, we have things we can do based on our performing. And then I think that goal setting and things for the kids at home is going to be extra important. So what else would you do, Yvonne?
What I was talking with concepts. So for me, rhythm is a key. I don't really care when my beginners, when we come together, if they're playing the wrong notes. They'll sort themselves out. Every instrument's different. Eventually, we will all be able to play the same note. So doing some rhythm exercises, looking at how you read it on a page, how you then interpret, how you recognise it. Things like that you can do because you can actually just say rhythms. You can just, ways of teaching the concepts differently. You can still do that. It's fingerings. If you've got kids doing beginner instruments, get them just doing fingerings. Again, that's what I do anyway. So he's read the note, do the fingering, or do the slide position, or do whatever, so that they're making that physical connection. Then when they've got the instrument here, they've literally just got to work on the physicality of playing the instrument. Looking at even things like the history of the instrument. I've discovered a whole new way of getting my, looking at allocating instruments for next year, which basically involves just each week in our school newsletter. For one school, we're going to put in a different daily demo, again from students in Manchester. Here is the instrument, here's some history on it, here is the inspiration of someone else playing it. Doing things like that and teaching, I know, again, my beginner high school band, we need to actually get to know every instrument. Have a look at this, have a listen to this, and have a listen to this piece. Can you find it? So working on ears. So it's thinking outside of how we do playing. And this is the bit I've loved, because you've got to think outside the square. And we've got the opportunity to add to what we do. And a colleague somewhere put it beautifully. She asked her students, right, what out of what we do don't we actually need? And they were really, really honest with her. She said, great. Now, instead of that, what do we need? What's missing that we can add? What can we do? And getting the students involved in how they think, because they've got the best ideas. And thinking of rehearsals as something other than playing, or even instrumental classes as things other than playing. I mean, hopefully eventually they'll be able to pick their instrument up. But, when you've got professional orchestras that won't be rehearsing till next year in some places, utilise those musicians. Get them involved, Zoom them in, or whatever you can do. We're actually allowed incursions now. And it suddenly dawned on me, well, hang on, I can have a band rehearsal and an incursion. Who can I get to come in and work with my groups? Who can I come in and teach? I've got a mate of mine who has given a couple of my brass students lessons. I'll get him to do others. He's in your country, not my country. Let's use people. All of this kind of stuff we can do. And as I said, people have said yes, not no. Because we're all in the same boat. It doesn't matter where around the world we are.
Those are great ideas. Thank you. Anything else? I know we've had a couple comments in the chat that people can read. Someone was talking about connecting with former students who are now professional conductors, producers, music therapists, etc. That might be another idea.
Yeah. And each school is different. So think about what would benefit to not only the band kids or the instrumental kids, but the whole group. What can you do within your younger groups, for example? and get other kids involved so that music becomes more part of everything, not just this separate little thing. Or how can, again, talking to one of my colleagues, I love talking to. We think alike, and we're both outside the square. And it's, how does music connect with other arts? If you look at pictures at an exhibition, what is it about? It's about painting. How does music relate to drama, to art? We can involve all of those kind of things and expand it. And then I've got a colleague here who every year chooses a musical and takes her, sorry, just dealing with the cat again, and takes her just come here. There we go. The cat became a celebrity while we were doing Zoom teaching. I had to make sure she was here all the time. They'd ask how she was. I think they miss her. Yeah, she takes them to a musical. So they choose a musical, they learn some repertoire from it, and then they go to it. So why not do things like that?
Sounds great. Anything else?
I can see the comment about the storage. Yeah, I did read something, a guideline somewhere about storage, but it only appeared once and then it disappeared. Again, part of it for us is the hard surfaces and making sure you wipe, and then you wipe, and then you wipe again. And getting kids not to touch things that aren't theirs. Perhaps one of the things it does too is it gives us the opportunity to educate those around us about instruments. Because I think one of the big things was if you blow air into an instrument, there's a lot of air coming out, and there's going to be a whole lot of things in that air that straight away we've got to get rid of that. And it's like, no, let's look at what's happening scientifically. Let's look at the nature of the instrument. It gives us a great chance to work in with our school leadership and our parents and explain a little bit more about what we do so they understand.
Yeah, I love how you've used a lot of these, you've seen these as opportunities instead of obstacles. And I think that's really important as we go back. And even when you're saying, when the kids are excited, you know, even though we're in this kind of COVID crisis, that we do take time to celebrate the things that are important to them, right? And that we've been missing for a long time. So I think I'll turn it over to Laura, and we're probably going to wrap it up.
Yeah, before we officially end our happy hour, we have each of the co-founders just sharing a brief statement. So first, just want to thank Yvonne for your incredible insight and your willingness to help us all look at and conceptualize what our futures with instrumental instruction would be. This was fantastic. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who was here today. And we are really thankful for your questions and your dedication to the field moving forward and being creative in what we can do for instrumental instruction. And secondly, I would just like to share a quote that has been resonating with me as I myself am starting to plan for virtual instruction in a brand new position, so lots of uncertainty there. This quote comes from Becoming by Michelle Obama, which is one of my favorite books. She states, "Everything was not lost. This was the message we needed to carry forward. It is what I truly believed. It wasn't ideal, but it was our reality. The world as it is. We needed to be resolute to keep our feet pointed in the direction of progress." So with that quote in mind, I would just encourage you all to recognize this reality we're living in, what our current state is like, to feel all of the feelings that you have in your heart about the upcoming school year, because we have many of them, and to continue to look for ways in which we can progress under our current unfortunate circumstances. And I'll pass it over to Jenny for the next statement.
Great, thanks for that quote, Laura. That's very timely. And one of the things that Yvonne had wanted to talk about that we didn't really feel we'd have time to get to today was the impact and just thoughts around the adults, the teachers, other adults in the school. And I know we were talking in our planning for today's happy hour about how we know some of us are feeling some anxiety and uncertainties, and we may be continuing that as school gets closer. So we did just want to maybe take a little poll, like a visual poll, if you can do it, or if you can, at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to give a reaction, and it'll give like a thumbs up. So if you are interested in possibly joining us, or if you think this would be a good idea for an August happy hour, to talk about some more pandemic planning in this positive opportunity kind of realm. If you might be interested in that, if you want to give us a thumbs up, we could, somebody wrote, we need an August happy hour, of course. So if you could give a reaction, that would be great. I see some smiles there, like, yes, please, I'm in. So I think that's good. And then I'm going to pass it over to Lori, who's going to talk about some of our, or one of our next panel sessions that we're going to have. Before we do that, I just want to give a quick shout out to Sean Meager, who is here from New Hampshire. I have to, whenever we have a guy on here, I feel like we got to give a little shout out with some confetti. And he is part of New Hampshire's, well, really Eastern Division and all that stuff. So thanks, Sean, for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenny. We are thrilled that Yvonne and all of you joined us today, and we are diligently planning and looking forward to future Women Banding Together events. Please tell others of all genders about our awesome group and what we are going to do, what we're planning to do to mentor women band directors. What we've been told is our interest and discussions are expanding beyond the lens of band directing to encompass many areas within education and even beyond that. As co-founders, our intentions are to engage live, or in this case, virtually, every 2 weeks with you, our incredible followers. As we have done since May, we are hoping to continue with one panel session per month in a more formal setting, and one happy hour per month in a less formal setting to include more audience participation, similar to today. Our fourth panel session will be held in August. Except for our first session, which we did not record, panel sessions 2 and 3 are both available for viewing as YouTube videos on our Facebook page. So I would encourage you to check those out if you weren't a part of that. Panel 2, which was held in June, was entitled Actionable Steps Towards Change, with our co-founders Ginny, Laura, Jenny, and myself serving as panelists, where we offered specific steps we took to transition with resilience in our lives, both professionally and personally. Panel 3, which was held on July 13th, was entitled Reflecting on Our Classrooms and Communities Through the Lens of Black Lives Matter, where we had the opportunity to speak with 4 guest panelists, including Dr. Wesley Brodnecks, Damian Kyle Crutcher, Anoa Green, and Shamika Nash. For our upcoming 4th panel session in August, Women Banding Together will continue to focus on the Black Lives Matter movement, as we realize it is important that we hear from students and parents too. We have invited parents and students ranging from middle school to collegiate level to serve as panelists on our August session to reflect on their educational experiences and expectations through the lens of Black Lives Matter. As the heartbeat of our communities, how do students and parents feel we, the music educators, can be more aware and responsive to their needs and create a more positive and inclusive learning environment? So please join us for this empowering follow-up panel session, which will be held on Monday, August 17th at 3:00 p.m. Eastern Time, as we advocate for the student voice and parent perspective. So Ginny, if you want to wrap up today's event, thank you, everyone.
Great, thanks, Lori. I want to add my thanks. Yvonne, this was so wonderful to have you talk about this, and it was just so fortuitous that we were discussing a little bit about this in our last happy hour, and we came out of that and we thought, gosh, we should do an interview with you. And you were thinking the same thing, because the next morning I woke up and there was that email from you saying, I'd like to offer help where I can. And this just naturally fell into place. And we are so, so grateful to you for getting up early and for sharing all of this information with us. I think we're probably a little bit envious of how you have you were dealing with all of this, but the support that you were getting from all the constituencies and the students who were involved in this too. So thanks again. I also want to thank Laura and Jenny for organizing this session and for doing all the planning for this. Thanks for all of the time that you put into that. And then I just want to add my thanks to everyone who's here for joining us again too. This is being recorded, and probably within a few days we'll have it available, and there will be a link on our Facebook page, but also I will send out an email to everyone who's on our email list so that you can have that. Please share the link with anyone that you think would be interested in viewing this as well. Again, if you haven't visited our Facebook page, please check it out and like us and follow us there. Help spread the word about women banding together. And if you know of anybody else who would like to be added to our email list, in fact, I would challenge you to give us a couple of names to be able to add on to our email list. I always do a follow-up email to everyone, so I'm going to include that in the email, and we would love if you could recommend some people that we can start including in this community as well. You can also reach out to us anytime. In all of the emails I send out, I include our URLs to our website, so you can contact us that way. And our information is also available on Facebook. So please join us again and continue to help spread the word about women banding together. And thank you once again for joining us. It's been a pleasure to spend some time with you.